Today's shiur begins 6 lines from the top of Daf Mem. Before we begin our shiur, let us point out that even though we are learning in the context of the Daf Yomi schedule, it's likely at this point that today's shiur Daf Mem will include Daf Mem Aleph as well, simply because we are going to be found in the middle of a long discussion. Breaking it in the middle would be to our detriment. The shiur might very well then continue to the top of Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara, Omar Rav Chisda, he makes 3 points. Number 1, Lilkois Ba'achas, a Nazir who cuts one hair, let's say uproots or shaves off one singular hair, is grounds for receiving lashings, for having violated the prohibition of Ta'ar lo yavor al roshei. Number 2, le'akev b'shtayim. At the end of his Nazirus, if he shaves his head but leaves 2 hairs, then we will say that he has not fulfilled his final haircut obligation of Nazirus. So 2 hairs that are left are a binding factor. Number 3, listor eino soser ela b'roiv roisha ubetar. When we make mention of a Nazir losing the Nazirus that he counted, he is soser. Soser means he destroys, literally, the days that he had observed till that point. This phenomenon arises of stira, of losing the days, erasure of the days that you counted, only if you shave the majority of your head as a Nazir, and you do so with a razor. The Gemara asks, Betar in b'midi achrina lo? Is the prohibition only if done with a razor and not with any other means? V'halkatani. But have we not learned minayin l'rabois es kol hamavirin? From where do we know to include all methods of hair removal, that they also would constitute the Nazir violation? So we see from this source that where marbe, we include all kinds of ma'avirin, hair removal methods, not just the tar. So why does Rav Chisda say that stira, the erasure of counted days, is only if the hair is removed with a tar, a razor? Elo ema, so rather we answer, ke'ain tar. In fact, all ma'avirin will result in stira, in the loss of days, but it has to be like a razor. The nature of a razor is that the hair is removed from its root. Tanyo nami hochi. We have a Tanaic source that points out the points that Rav Chisda had made. Nazir shetolash merat sifseif kol shehu chayav. If a Nazir pulls out or removes a hair in any other method, kol shehu, even one hair, he is in violation, and that would mean malchus. He's subject to the lashing punishment. V'einoi soiser ela b'roiv roishoi ubetar. And the loss of days already counted toward Nazirus is only if he shaves off the majority of his hair, and in a method like the tar. Even though the source says ubitar with a razor, Tosfos comments a method of hair removal like the tar, which is shaving, removing, plucking out the hair from its ikar, from its root. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, Keshem Shishtei Cyrus Makvois Boy. Just like 2 hairs are a restraining factor or a prevention of fulfilling the Nazir's haircut requirement, Kach Shtei Cyrus Soisus Bo. So too, 2 hairs have that much significance that they will be responsible for his having to start his counting all over again. So you can see that as far as how much is required for stira, you have a machlokes, a Tanaic controversy. Tanan Hasam. We have a source that on the side of our Gemara we introduce Gimel Megalchin Betar. There are 3 individuals in halacha who have to remove their hair, shave with a razor. Shlosha Megalchin V'tiglachasan Mitzvah. There are 3 that are expected to shave, and their shaving is a commandment. Nazir u'mitzora u'leviim. V'kulan shegilchu shelo betar. Any of these, the Nazir at the end of his Nazirus, or the mitzora at the conclusion of his mitzora tuma period, and the leviim when they were being consecrated to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, if they shave without a razor, or if they left 2 hairs unshaven, uncut, they haven't accomplished anything. Omar Mar, Shloisha Megalchen v'tiglochasan mitzvah. The Gemara asks on the source that we just read, Pshita. It's obvious. The point made in the Tanaic source are actually found in scriptures, in psukim. So what's the need for the Tanaic source? Mahu detema. Mishumavuri seyahu. Had I had just the chumash, just the psukim, I would have thought that the Torah's expectation of these people is hair removal. V'afilu sochnosha. Even smearing on a depilatory would have been sufficient. Komash malon delo. The source, by using the term tiglochasan, that is to the exclusion of a nosha, of a depilatory, and hence there is a need for the Tanaic source. Kotoni, it was taught the kulon shegilchu shelo betar. We have a little arrow to the side of the Gemara. You can see where this quote comes from. And now we begin a long question. Bishlam gabi Nazir ksiv tar lo avar al rosho. I understand that the tar is necessary, is required for the Nazir final haircut, as is learned from the pasuk tar lo yavar al rosho. Rashi points out that there were different methods of how you see that from the pasuk, but either way, either Rebbe's method or the Tanakhama's method, as we've seen in the past. But from this pasuk, we conclude that a tar is required, is binding for the final Nazir haircut. V'gabi leviim ksiv ve'aviru tar al kol besaram. There again, the pasuk says explicitly that the shaving of the leviim is to take place with a tar. Ela mitzora betar minolan. Our question focuses on the mitzora. From where do we know that the mitzora needs to shave we call the body shave, all his hair is removed with a tar? Before we go too much further, let's glance at the side. We have a nosei mivneh heading, a topic heading combined with a structural note. Triangles start appearing in the Gemara. They will appear in fluctuating and in opposite directions. On the side, we've written that after you see the triangle, the ma'akav meaning an attempt to keep track of a give and take style Gemara. These are attempts to find a source that the mitzora, at the conclusion of his tsaras period, shaves with a tar. We're going to try to derive the laws of mitzora from number 1, Nazir, number 2, halavim. We're going to discover, as we continue in the Gemara, that we're not really going to be able to derive mitzora from any one of them, Nazir or leviim. Later the Gemara will investigate, what about deriving the mitzora haircut from stating the requirement by both Nazir and leviim through a common denominator between them. The Gemara will challenge that as well. So we now embark on our inquiry. Katani, we mentioned already, actually we're at Elo Mitzora B'Tar Minolan. We're focusing on the dashed underline. This dashed underline is because this is really the focus of our attention in the upcoming Gemara. So the Mitzora, upon the conclusion of his Tzoras, he removes his body hair. The main point that we didn't mention till now is that the Torah doesn't say explicitly, in contrast to the Nazir and Levi, where tar was mentioned explicitly, we don't find that by the Mitzorah. So the Gemara says, "V'chitemo teisi miLeviim." If you suggest, let us learn from the laws of the Leviim. Ma Leviim shekein tu'unin tiglachas ve'in tiglachasan el betar. Just like the Leviim require a hair removal, and their hair removal is only with a tar. Afani obvious hamitzorah shuton tiglachas. The Mitzorah too. The pasuk mentions that he requires a giluach, a hair removal. Ve'in tiglachas el betar. And the hair removal, the hair shaving, will be with a tar, with a razor, just like by Leviim. The Gemara says, rejects that. Ikar lemifrach, ma leViim shekein tunin tenufa begufan, toimar b'mitzorah delo. The Leviim, when they were consecrated, there was also a process called tenufa, where they were waved, they were physically picked up, and that ceremony doesn't exist by Mitzorah. So since by Leviim tenufa took place, it might be that there we're restrictive and say you can use only a tar. But by the Mitzorah, where you don't have a tenufa requirement, maybe you don't have a tar requirement either. Elo teisi mi Nazir. Let's derive Mitzorah from Nazir. No, that can't be done. Ma le Nazir shekein korbanot ton lechem toimar b'Mitzorah delo. The Nazir has a restriction or a stringency, and that is that in addition to the fact that he brings sacrifices, his sacrifices, shlomim, is accompanied by 20 loaves, 20 baked loaves. You don't have loaves in the case of the Mitzorah, so maybe you don't have tar by the Mitzorah either. Elo mechado lo asyot. Teisi mitravehon. We've demonstrated that you can't derive Mitzorah for any one of those examples, the Nazir or Leviim. Maybe by combining, by noticing a common denominator between Levi and Nazir, that both have a tiglachas requirement and they both require a tar, let's then extrapolate from that to the Mitzorah and say he too requires the razor. Now, structurally, you notice, first of all, you have a bracketed section. Within the brackets, the Gemara, in anticipation of this common denominator idea, the Gemara is going to go over what we've learned already, the Nazir and the Levi, and point out how you can't learn from either one individually. After the bracketed section, notice, after the Gemara having said Teisi mitravehon, skipping the brackets, Hatzara Sheva Shebahen, the common denominator between the Levi and the Nazir, Shein Tunin Tiglachas v'Tiglosim Betar. They both require Tiglachas, the hair shaving, and they are done with a tar. So Afani Obvious Mitzor Shuton Tiglachas v'Tiglosim Betar. So I'll extend that to the Mitzor as well, who we know has a Tiglachas requirement. The Torah tells us about the Mitzor requiring Tiglachas, and we will assume then that his Tiglachas is also with a tar. Let's go over now the bracketed section. The Gemara says, the Mitzorah hair shaving with a razor, let us conclude it, mi travehon, from combining Nazir and Levi. Well, mehei teisi, from which should I conclude tar? Teisi mi Leviim, should I try to conclude tar from Mitzorah from Leviim? Al Leviim shekein tunin tenufa begufan. You can't derive Mitzorah from Leviim. Leviim have the tenufa requirement. Therefore, they have tar. I don't know such by a Mitzorah where there's no tenufa requirement. Nazir yochiach. So let Nazir, which there's no tenufa requirement by the Nazir, and yet his shaving, his tiglachas is with a tar. So too, let me say by Mitzorah, the same thing. No. Ma le Nazir shekein korbono to'un lechem. The Nazir korban, the Nazir sacrifice, has a baked loaf additional requirement. So the Nazir also has a tar requirement. but not so by the Mitzorah. Doesn't have a lechem requirement, a bread requirement. Leviim yochichu. Well, let the case of Leviim prove. They don't have a bread requirement, and yet their tiglachas, their shaving, is with a tar, with a razor. We said that you can't learn from a Levi either because there's tenufa begufan. The chozer hadin, the logic revolves. Lo roizeh keroizeh, velo roizeh keroizeh. Neither one example is like the other. Hatzad hashava shebohen, the common denominator between Leviim and Nazir, shehein te'unin tiglachas v'tiglachason betar. They require tiglachas, and their tiglachas is with a razor. Afani obvious mitzvah shuton tiglachas. I will therefore extend this to a mitzvah, where the Torah requires tiglachas, and with what? The tiglachaso betar, and his tiglachas, his hair shaving, will also be with a tar, just like by the Levi and Nazir. Omar le Rava mi Barnish le Ravashi. V'lifroch, I can challenge, I can undo that limud, that teaching, as follows: Ma lahatzad hashava shebohen shekain. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. Ein korbonoi bedalus. Toimar b'mitzorah shekorbono bedalus. Rava Barnish says you can't learn tar from the fact that Levi and Nazir have a tar requirement. The reason we could say that they have a tar requirement is that their sacrifices come at a fixed rate, meaning there's no consideration for a Nazir or a Levi of limited income, where we would permit a cheaper or less expensive type sacrifice brought instead of an animal, maybe birds, and if that's too expensive, then a meal offering. We don't have that flexibility by Levi or Nazir. And since we don't have that flexibility, so we have the stringency of a tar requirement. But by Mitzorah, should I say the same thing by Mitzorah, where the Torah does have a korban income level consideration, and therefore, just like we have this leniency by the Mitzorah that we take into consideration as income level, according to which we prescribe what kind of sacrifice he brings. So another leniency would be that his hair removal isn't limited, isn't restricted to a razor. So at this point, we do not have a source for the Mitzorah requiring a razor for his tiglachas. Before we, let's say, deal with that, the Gemara raises a question, a curious thing has happened in the last couple of dapim of Gemara. And we have a question. Rava Bar Misharshia raises a question, lasts a couple of lines. And before we read the Gemara text, we have a note on the side, the nosei, which reads, Tamihaso Rava Bar Misharshia. Rava Bar Misharshia has a question, to me as a wonderment. Mitzad echad mashma liel, from one standpoint it seems, it appears from before, the pshita de tiglachas mitzorah betar. We had a Tanaic source in one of our previous dapim, where the Gemara pointed out that the Nazir couldn't be derived from the Mitzorah. In other words, it seemed that it was obvious that a Mitzorah has a tar requirement. That's what we were given to understand, that the final Nazir haircut should be learned from Mitzorah. That we couldn't do because Mitzorah represents an area of stringency, so there the tar is what's required. But the Nazir is not as stringent an area, so maybe tar wouldn't be required. That was a piece of logic that we saw recently. Well, in speaking that way, it seems obvious then that the Mitzorah has a tar requirement. The whole question was, had the Torah not said anything about ta'ar by a Nazir, could I have figured it out from Mitzorah? And the answer there, the Gemara said, no, I can't derive Nazir from the Mitzorah. But there was a given that the Mitzorah had a ta'ar requirement. And we continue in our note, umitzad sheni lo pshita. And from a second standpoint, it's not obvious that the Mitzorah has a ta'ar requirement. Kfishur inu, the nisu lilmod oisoi mi Nazir v'leviim. In our most recent discussion, just now, we were actually trying to derive Mitzorah from Nazir and Levium, and we were unable to do thusly. So, it then would appear that it's not clear that the Mitzorah has a tar requirement. So the Gemara asks, on the second line from the top, Omar le Rava bar Mesharshi el Rava. Hi Tana. This is a reference to the Tanaic source that we saw on our previous daf. Me'ikara Omar lelamdoi mi mitzoroi efshar shein donin kal mechomer lahachmir olav. In fact, this was at the very top of Omid Aleph, the very end of our previous recorded shiur. You saw that in the Tanaic source quoted there at the top of Mem Omid Aleph. And in saying that, what are we in effect saying? What is the Tana there saying? That the Tiglachas Achroina, the last shaving of the Nazir, the shaving at the end of his Nazir period, that it has to be done b'tar, could not be learned from Mitzorah. Why? Because we don't conclude an area of leniency from an area of stringency regarding astringency. Nazir relative to Mitzorah was viewed as an area of leniency, and we know by Mitzorah that there is a restriction that the hair must be removed only with a tar, and I can't derive that information from Mitzorah to an area of leniency, namely the Nazir. Hence, seeing that, according to the Tana, the Mitzorah Tiglachas is obviously with a tar. The Hadar Omar, and then we went and said, Neilif Medino Nami Lo Yolif, that a Mitzorah should have a tar requirement. We tried to learn through logic, through comparison to Nazir and Levium, and we were unable to do so, leaving us with the feeling that it's not so obvious that a Mitzorah has a tar requirement. So, in simple terms, make up your mind. Is it clear that a Mitzorah has a tar requirement, or is it not so clear? Omar Le, Rava responds, Hahu aliba de Rabbanon, Ha aliba de Rebbe Eliezer. That which was stated at the very top of Mem Omid Aleph, name of Omid Aleph, that it's obvious that a Mitzorah has a tar requirement, that is one Tanaic school of thought, namely the Rabbanon. The approach that we saw later on Omid Aleph, in other words, the attempt to discover, does a Mitzorah in fact have a ta'ar requirement, namely it wasn't so clear, that is in accordance with Rebbe Eliezer. Now these names, Rabbanon and Rebbe Eliezer, are introduced in the following Tanaic source. The following Tanaic source deals with a prohibition of shaving one's beard. It's called Pa'as Zekono. Shaving one's beard, and it's found in Maseches Makis. There's a Machlokes Tanoim that we will see. In the course of the sugya, we are going to be exposed to these two opinions, the Rabbanan and Rebbe Eliezer, and I might as well say that through the back door, we're going to see where they learn that a Mitzorah Tiglachas is with a razor. But at this point in the Gemara, the opening of the Gemara, it's not so obvious. It's not so obvious that that's what the Gemara's, let's say, goal is. But it will become clear as we go through the Gemara and from time to time make reference to the commentaries to see that that's what we're trying to say. On the side of the Gemara, you notice we have a Nosei Mivne heading. A triangle appears, and there's also Roman numerals 1 and 2. These represent Mekoros l'Rabbanan v'Reb Ozer. The Tiglachas Mitzora he dafke betar. Sources that eventually will show, according to the Rabbanan on the one hand, and according to Reb Ozer on the other, that the Mitzora Tiglachas is only with a tar. Now, structurally, take a look at the Gemara. We have in 2 lines from now, you'll see a triangle where you can see the term Mai Tamayo de Rabbanan, and on the side a Roman numeral number 1. On Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, and this is basically the reason why we have to combine these 2 dapim into one shiur. You see on the 5th line from the top at the end of the line of Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, Reb Ozer Mai Taima, where the Gemara will ask, according to Reb Ozer, how does he know that the Tiglachas Mitzora is with a tar? We turn to the Gemara, and we mentioned that we are going to be introduced to the Rabban and Reb Ozer, but through the back door. We have a source that deals with the prohibition of shaving one's face, the Pas Zikono, found in Maseches Makis, and it says as follows: V'eino chayav ad yilkitenu b'tar. The prohibition of removing the hair from one's face. The Gemara speaks about several corners of one's face, different locations. There's also a discussion in the commentaries about what exactly is referred to, but they're called the corners of one's face, the pa'as zikonai. The Tanna Kama says that prohibition of hair removal is only if shaved with a razor. Rabbi Eliezer Omer afilu liktoi b'milkad uvrehitni chayav. Rabbi Eliezer says that prohibition of hashchosas pa'as zokon, of shaving one's face, that is even if the hair is removed with a tweezers or a plane device, plane, plane, a rehitni, not just a razor. There's a little note that we've included on the side. There's a starred note, and I've written Nira Lefian's Daiti. It appears to me the Mishnah Zu Muva Laharos Shechachom Reb Ozer Cholkim Binyan Tar. The source is brought in to show a machlokus between the 2 opinions regarding a razor. But as far as the mitzora shaving requirement, body hair removal, that everyone agrees is with a razor. The mitzora betar. So now we continue in the Gemara. Mai tamayu d'Rabbanan. In order to appreciate this question, we first glance at Rashi. V'amrinon mai tamayu d'Rabbanan delo mechayvi b'hakofa elo betar. The prohibition that we just learned, the prohibition of hakofa sarosh, we made reference to the hashchosa zokon. Rashi makes reference to hakofa sarosh, the prohibition of removing the hair from one's temple area. The Mishnah in Makis deals with both pa'as zokon and hakofa sarosh. The question of the Gemara, as we said, my taimai d'Rabbanan, the Rashi had said, what is the reason for Rabbanan delo mechayvi b'hakofa elo betar? From where do the Rabbanan know that hakofa is this isur of hair removal is from the head for a common person, that the isur, the prohibition, is only with the use of a razor? That's the Tanna Kama. Before going on in the Gemara, though, I want to look together at the Tosfos, the beginning of the Tosfos. Umay tamayo de Rabbanan klomar mehecha nafgalon de pshita lahu de mitzora betar afilu below Nazir kidesvira lei. Tosfos is giving us the overall question. As we mentioned before, the job of the Gemara is to discover, according to the Rabbanan, where do they find it obvious that the mitzora hair removal is done with a tar. And what we're doing then is we're, as I said, working through the back door, coming off of the prohibition for the general population of removing their facial hairs with a tar. According to the Rabbanan, it's only with a tar that the Torah prohibits. So, my Tamayu de Rabbanan. What is the reasoning of the Rabbanan? And combining the Rashi and what Tosfos says, what is the reason of the Rabbanan that the general prohibition of facial hair or head hair removal is limited to the tar? And through this, we'll discover where the Rabbanan know that the Metzora hair removal is obviously with a tar. Tisanya. We have a source, and we quote a pasuk that we've included on the side of the Gemara, Vayikra Perek Yudalid Pasuk Tes, and it reads. Let's read it together on the side. The pasuk is from the Mitzvah. It says, "V'hoya b'yom hashvi," on the seventh day of purification of a Mitzorah, Yigalach es kol saro. He is to remove all of his body hair, all hair growing on his body, and then the pasuk specifies es roishoy v'es zikono v'es gabois einov v'es kol saro yigaleach. His hair on his head, on his beard, on his eyebrows, all his hair he removes. Was it necessary to specify each part of the body after you tell me kol saro, all hair is removed? So the brisa zikono ma Talmud lomar. The term zikono, the specification of beard, why does the Torah say that? Isn't it so that zikono is included in the expression kol saro that's already stated in the pasuk? So zikono is then an extra word. We have then by mitzorah the word zikono as an extra word. So what is it there for? Lefi shenemar, it says in a different section of the Torah, it says regarding the kohanim, it says upaas zikonam lo yigalechu. Kohen, in the Torah says that the Kohen facial hairs are not to be shaven off. Yochol afilu mitzorah kain. Would that apply as well to a Kohen who happens to have been a Metzorah, that he doesn't shave? Talmud lomar zikono. So the extra word zikono in the Parsha of Metzorah is a reference that even a Kohen who was restricted by the Torah, if he is a Metzorah, he is to shave his facial hairs as part of his Metzorah shaving requirements, entire body hair removal. Umenolan de betar. The Gemara asks us, from where do we know that the giluach referred to, the shaving referred to, is with a razor? And once I can establish that it's with a razor, I'll then know that the Metzorah shaving is likewise with a razor. So we have to find that the giluach of the kohanim, which was prohibited, was a giluach with a razor. And from that, I can then establish that, well, when the Kohen happened to be a Metzorah, that which he was originally prohibited doing, as a Metzorah, he must do. So that's our question. From where do we know that's betar? Tosfos clarifies. Let's look at it together. And the widest lines, the second of the widest lines under the Rashi, the betar, klomar chiyuv hashchosa zokon, the prohibition of facial shaving, meno lehu l'rabbanon, the lohavi elo betar. From where do the Rabbanan know that prohibition is limited to the use of a tar? From that, I'll then be able to conclude that the Metzorah, which supersedes, which overrules that restriction, is then also betar, also only betar. That the Metzorah hair shaving Torah requirement is only with a tar. So let's continue in our Gemara. Uminolan de betar disanya. Upas zikonam lo yigalechu. This was a pasuk we just saw from Sefer Vayikra Perek Aleph, which deals with prohibitions that apply to kohanim. And it says there that their facial hairs they shall not megaleach. Yachal afilu gilcho b'misparayim yechayev. Would it be even if they shave with a scissors, they would be in violation? Talmud Lomar. So we cite another pasuk from Vayikra Perek Yud Tes, which is not by the kohanim, it's by Yisraelim, by Jewish people in general. Lo veloi sashchis pa'as zikonecha. So you see the term pa'as zikonecha by Yisrael, and you found the term pa'as zikonam by the kohanim. Yochol liktoy b'milkat v'hitni yehei chayav. So, first of all, we established that a scissors would not be a violation because the Torah, when it violates the facial shaving, it's a violation of lo sashchis. Sashchis means destruction. A scissors does not produce hashchosa. It doesn't constitute a violation of what the pasuk says, v'lo sashchis. So, understanding the meaning of the word tashchis, if you understand that word properly, you understand that a misparayim, a scissors, is not restricted. Well, if the standard is hashchasa, then would there be a violation if he likto b'milkat v'hitni? Would there be a violation if he uses a tweezers or a plane to remove the hair? Yeh chayiv, would that be chayiv? Would that be a violation? Well, no. Talmud Lomar upaz zikonam lo yigalechu, meaning even though the tweezer hair removal would be destructive in terms of the hair, it would be hashchosa, it's not going to be a violation because the pasuk by kohanim says upaz zikonam lo yigalechu. It uses a specific word, yigalechu. How are we to understand these verses? Ezu giluach sheyesh boy hashchosa. You might notice that we've underlined the word tashchis and the word yigalechu. In effect, we're combining the two psukim. In both psukim, you saw the same expression of pa'asikonam or pa'asikonecha used, so we combine the two psukim and we conclude as follows: Ezu giluach sheyesh boy hashchosa. What kind of shaving has in it hashchosa? Hevi omer ze tar. The term giluach is a reference, you see this in the Meforshim here, the normal way of shaving. What is the normal way of giluach, of shaving, that has hashchosa? That is only with a tar. And the Torah says that Jewish people should not use a tar. Now, that having been said, we know that the prohibition, as we saw earlier, upaz zikonam lo yigalechu, that prohibition is with a tar. The pasuk spoke about zikonam, and we said that a kohen who was a mitzorah, even though he is warned pa'az zikonam lo yigalechu, the kohen, the standard kohen is not to use a razor, and of course it applies also to Yisrael. However, a kohen mitzorah is to use the razor, and the thinking right now is only a razor. And there you have it. Our original question was, how do the Rabbanan know that a mitzorah hair removal is done through a razor? It's what we just got finished proving. So we had to show what was prohibited by the pasuk of pa'az zikonam lo yigalechu. We said giluach sheish bo hashchosa. We said that's a reference to a tar, only a tar, and that which is prohibited there, when it comes to a kohen mitzorah, it is what is necessary: hair removal with a tar. And what we're trying to emphasize is that the mitzorah hair removal must be done only with a tar. It can't be accomplished any other way. And on that, we challenge with a question, a 4-line question. Mimai, who says that that's what we're to conclude? It might very well be that the mitzora, if he does his body hair removal with a tweezers or a plane, he's also fulfilling his requirement. And what we saw above with regard to the tar is we're informing you, the word zikona would be telling us that even if he happens to use a tar, he would not be in violation. But to say that only a tar, who says? The Gemara answers. And notice we have a long answer marking. And on the side of the Gemara, we also have a mivneh, structural note. Diamonds will appear here, and at the top of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Shtei Tshuvos Lochiach. These are 2 answers to prove Da'odich Siv Zikono Hainu Lelame de Mitzor Tiglo Chosoi Davke Betar Ulafuki Kol Shar Mavirim. To prove that the Mitzora hair removal is only with a tar. And that is all derived from the word zikono. And of course this is all within the opinion of the Rabbanan. So now we turn to the Gemara. Amri, we answer. If that were really so, that the Mitzora hair removal could be accomplished with a milkat or a hitni, the tweezers or a plane, lishtoik kra minei, let the Torah have remained silent with regard to its use of the word zikono by the Mitzora. Ve'ano amino, and I would have figured as follows. Uma gabi Nazir de isura ka'avid afilu hachi mechayev hacha de mitzvah lo kol shekain. I will tell you ahead of time that how to translate this line, how to explain it. This is a machlokes in the Meforshim. What we'll do is use the commentary of the Rosh, and notice the Rosh at the bottom, first of the wide lines under the Tosfos. Uma Nazir de isura ka'avid dafilu Nazir tahor chotei. Even a Nazir who concluded his Nazirus in a state of purity without defiling himself, he's called a sinner. As the Gemara says in the beginning of Maseches Nedarim, it was also dealt with in this Masechta, Kedinjir Shalom Nodar Ben Nazir. The Rosh has a second commentary, and he says, V'yesh meforshim, Deminozir Tome Yolef, Shegam Tiglachosa Betar, the Lekamon Bishmaitzin, Utiglachosai Bo Al Yadei Isur, the Nazir who became defiled, he also has a required haircut at the end of the purification, the Tumah period, and his haircut is a requirement through a violation, namely he became Tomei. V'afilu hachi mechayev legaleach rosha betar. Nevertheless, either one, the Nazir Tor or the Nazir Tomei, have to do their hair removal with a tar, v'dochi lav da'kofa. And even though there's this sinful aspect to the Nazir, and yet the razor hair removal is done, overriding the other Torah prohibition of removing the head of hair, which is prohibited for a regular person to do, to shave off the hair certainly around his temples. That's certainly prohibited. And yet the Nazir will take a razor and remove that hair as part of his Nazir haircut requirement. And we see that we're dochev olav, we supersede the negative command of hakofa. Let's continue. continue reading in the Rosh. He said, we're assuming right now that the haircut a Nazir takes, the total head hair removal, the total head shaving, is what, if you weren't a Nazir, it would be prohibited. Hacha, the mitzvah ka'avit, shein shum isur b'tiglachas mitzorah lo kol shekain. Here, in the case of the mitzorah, where there's no violation, there's no sinfulness, person is afflicted with tzoras. There's no, even though the Gemara elsewhere describes why tzoras, in Erechin it describes why tzoras comes, but for our purposes, it's not obviously related to sin. So it's all the more obvious. Shetiglachas mitzorah tidche lav dahashchos zokan. All the more so where if an area that's we'll call sin based, we're allowing the overriding of a prohibition. In something that's non-sin based, then all the more so we would provide for the overriding of the prohibition. So now our Gemara is saying that if it were so that the mitzorah hair removal could be accomplished with the other means, the milkad or the rehitni, the Torah wouldn't have to spell out zikono by mitzorah. I would have simply said, we find by the Nazir, who's called sinner, and yet he uses a tar and is over and violates and it supersedes the prohibition of hakafa. The mitzorah, which is not sin-based at all the more so, the tiglachas mitzorah would be doche, the lav of hashchos hazokan. We continue at the top of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. V'su Isalka daitoch ki ovid b'milka v'ritni mitzvah ka'ovid. If it were so that he could accomplish, that the mitzvah could accomplish his haircut removal with these other means, midalo ksiv tar, from the fact that the Torah does not spell out tar explicitly, I would tell you, you're not allowed to use a tar. That you would have to use some other means. Reish Lakish, based on Reish Lakish's principle. Diomar kol mokim shata moitzi aseh v'lo yisaseh. Wherever you find in the Torah a conflict between a positive command and a negative command. Imata yochol l'kayim eshnei mutav. If you can, we would say, have your cake and eat it too. In other words, fulfill the positive command without violating the negative command, mutav, that would be the best. V'im lav, however, if you're in a situation where they conflict, and I can't accomplish the positive command without violating the negative, in other words, the negative command would have to be violated, then we have a principle, yovoi aseh v'yidche es lo yisaseh. The positive would supersede the negative. It would push off the negative command. So once you acknowledge that zikono is allowing the use of the tar, we don't stop there. We say you would have to use a tar, because if the other method was an option, namely the milkad or the rehitni was an option for the mitzorah, then we wouldn't allow the tar. Why not? Because if by using the milkad or rehitni, I wouldn't be violating the isur of hashchosas zikono or hakofas harosh, if we speak in these terms. Why? As we pointed out before, that the isur of hashchosa zikono is only in a tiglachas sheyesh bo hashchosa. The milkad or the rehitni wouldn't have been a violation. So just to repeat this last point, if milkad and rehitni were an option, then I wouldn't allow you to use the tar, because by using the tar you are activating a positive command in order to violate or supersede a negative command. If there was some other option, we wouldn't let you do that. So from the fact that zikono, the extra word, appears by mitzora, the Gemara's question or suggestion falls away. Namely, the Gemara had suggested in the question preceding this long answer was maybe the other means are optional, and the Torah says zikono only to say that using the tar would not be a violation. That is not tenable. As we said, the milkad or hitni would not be a means of accomplishing the mitzvah, because if it was, then there would be no provision for using a tar. So at this point, there was a marking that we didn't mention, but maybe it was obvious. We had a Roman numeral number 1 in a triangle, and we also have the extended dash line till this point in the Gemara. This shows you that all of this piece of Gemara was designed to show how the Rabbanon know that the mitzora is clearly using has to use a tar. Rebbe Ozer, my timer. Rebbe Ozer, Tosfos says, he was the opinion that said when it comes to the prohibition of hashchasas pazakonoi, that prohibition is violated even with a milkat and rehitni, with the tweezers and a plane. So let's look at the Tosfos together. Rebbe Ozer, in the toward the lower part of the narrow lines of the Tosfos, Rebbe Ozer diyomer afilu likto b'milkat rehitni chayav b'paz d'zolken u'mechayav b'pas d'zolken afilu b'shar mashchisen. All other destructive methods of hair removal would be a violation of lo sashis paz zikonom. V'shapir itzter zikono de mitzora. And then it's understandable why I need zikono for mitzora the dochi lav dashchos zokon. That the Torah tells me that the mitzora who needs to do a full body hair removal, the prohibition, the lav of hashchos zokon will be superseded. V'hainu nami b'shar mashchisen. As far as Rebbe Ozer is concerned, that could very well be with other mashchisen. In other words, with other mashchisen, you would ordinarily be in violation of the lav, of the negative command, and in the case of the mitzora, so you're allowed to violate that negative command. Yeah, but as far as Rebbe Ozer is concerned, that might be with any other thing other than a tar. How is Rebbe Ozer going to know that the tiglachas mitzora is only with a tar? He's not going to use the word zikono for that. So the Gemara says, Yolif lo me rosho. There's another word that appears to be extra in the case of the mitzora, namely the word rosho. After all, as we said before with the Rabbanon, the pasuk by Mitzori says, Kol Sairo, all his hair. Isn't head hair included in all of your body hair? So now the Gemara. Rebbe Ozer, my taima. Where does Rebbe Ozer know that tiglachas of a Mitzora is only betar? And we saw through the Tosfos that zikono won't be enough for Rebbe Ozer. Answer, Yolif me rosho. Tisanya, rosho. The word rosho by mitzora matam alomar. What do you need that word for? It's already included in kol sairo. Lefi shenemar gabi Nazir. Pasuk by Nazir says tar lo yavor al rosho. Yocholaf Nazir mitzora came. What if a Nazir happened to be a mitzora? Is he also prohibited at the end of his tzoras period in shaving with a tar? Talmud lomar rosho. So the word rosho by mitzora tells me that a Nazir, that's a mitzora, well, he's going to have to use the tar. So that would answer our question. How does Rebbe Ozer know that a mitzora haircut is only with a tar? So we would know it from the word rosho. The Gemara asks a question very similar to the question we just got finished with the Rabbanon. The question is a long question. Mimai, how do you know that the mitzora is only with a tar? Maybe with the Mitzorah, his hair removal could be accomplished with a tweezers or a plane. V'chitema tar lomali, and you'll ask, well, if that's the case, then why does the Torah suggest a tar through the word rosho? L'meimra, it would tell me dafilu betar, that even if he wants to use a tar, a razor, he can do that. Sakad chamina hoil v'gabi Nazir ki ovid betar mechayev, gabi mitzora nami lechayev, komash malon delo. I need the Torah to tell me that the Nazir mitzora has a tar option, not a tar requirement, a Torah option. You ask, what do I need to be told that for? Well, since a basic Nazir, a standard Nazir, in the midst of his Nazirus, he is not allowed to use a tar. It says, tar lo yavar al rosho. I might have thought that a Mitzorah, that is a Nazir that in the middle of his Nazirus became a Mitzorah, is also prohibited in using the tar. Therefore, the Torah says rosho, to say no, that he's allowed to use the tar, but not that it's restricted to a tar. So with this question in mind, we're asking, according to HaRav Ozer, how does he know that the Mitzorah hair removal is only with a tar? Maybe it's just one option. The Gemara answers a very similar answer to what we had before. If you were to actually think that the Mitzorah hair removal could be accomplished with those other means, midalo kosav tar keresh lakish. Now this phrase is very, very terse, so we'll explain. We would not be matir the tar. If those other means were allowed, we would not have been matir the tar. From the fact that the Torah doesn't write tar explicitly, I wouldn't have allowed it based on Reish Lakish's teaching. What was Reish Lakish's teaching? That wherever you can fulfill a positive command and at the same time not supersede through that fulfillment a negative command, that's what we would demand of you. So that if the milkat or a hitni was an option for the Mitzorah, the Nazir who happened to become Mitzorah would say, you are not allowed to use a tar, because the use of the tar is the violation of a negative command, and you can fulfill the positive command through the milkat or a hitni. Therefore, the suggestion that milkat or hitni is also a way of the Mitzorah accomplishing it, his hair removal requirement, and the tar is just another option, that is ruled out. So, at this point then, we have the answer to our question, where does Rebbe Ozer know that a Mitzorah removes his hair only with a razor? The answer is from the word roshoi. We continue in the Gemara. The Rabbanan hai roshoi mai darshi bei. The Rabbanan who learned the Mitzorah razor requirement from Zikano, what did the Rabbanan learn from Rosho? Answer, miboya lehu lemidchi lav tahakofa. They need it for a Mitzorah, even if he's not a Nazir, that in fulfilling his Mitzorah hair removal requirements, he is allowed to supersede the prohibition of removing one's temple hairs. The Sanya, the Pasuk says, Lo sakifu pas roshchem. A Jew, a male Jew is prohibited in shaving his head around. There happen to be some, as at least as of this recording, there are certain, haircut styles that exist in the population that are totally, diametrically prohibited, diametrically against the Torah's teachings. And those are different kinds of haircuts or hairstyles where the the hair around the ears is totally removed, leaving a crop of hair in the middle. It might be called the Mohawk style haircut or what have you. Those different styles of hair removal. There were, I recall, a style of shaving one's head all around, leaving a ponytail type growth right coming out from the middle of one's head. Also, a violation of this. Lo sakifu pas roishchem. So that shaving the hair from one's temples, the hair growing in front of one's ears, on either side of his head, that hair cannot be removed according to the Torah. So is that so? Yochol af mitzora kain? A mitzora, upon the conclusion of his Nazir, he has to remove all the hair growing from his body, including his head. So is he also bound by this restriction? Talmud loma rosho. So the word rosho says, in the case of a mitzora, that negative command is superseded. The Gemara continues, Loma li lemichtav rosho. Why does the Torah need rosho for that? The tepukle mizakono. Why not learn this concept of the mitzora being in the position where, for his haircut, a negative command that applies to others, in his case, is going to be superseded. The sanya, and here you see it, zikono matam lomar. The word zikono by mitzora, what is its purpose? After all, as we pointed out many times today, the mitzora must remove all his hair, including zikono, including his facial hairs. So why does the Torah specify zikono? Because the pasuk elsewhere says, "Upas zikonam lo yigalechu," that their hair, their facial hairs, are not to be shaven off. Yocholaf mitzora kain, is that prohibition applicable to the mitzora? Upon the conclusion of his tzoras, he is too restricted. Talmud lomar zikono. Zikono tells me that the prohibition of pas zikonam lo yigalechu is superseded. Well, at this point, then, we ask, Loma li lemichtav rosho v'loma li lemichtav zikono. If the purpose is to introduce this principle of the asay of mitzora coming to supersede these negative commands, why do I have to spell it out twice? Tzrichi. I need to spell it out twice. Dihi kosav rachmono zikono v'lo kosav roshoi have amino. Had the Torah written zikono and not written rosho, I would have thought hakofas kol rosh lo shmo hakofa. The entire head being shaved of its hair is not considered a prohibition. According to this method of reasoning, the prohibition of hakofas harosh would be limited to shaving the head around, leaving hair growing in the middle. But hakofas kol harosh, I would have thought, is not a prohibition. Therefore, the Torah writes rosho to tell me that even where all the hair is removed, it would otherwise, if it wasn't a mitzora, it would have been prohibited. The Gemara continues at the top of Omid Beis. The I kosav rosho v'lo kosav zikono have amina mashma tarti. Had the Torah just written rosho and not written zikono, I would have concluded the following 2 points. Number one, the osi aseh v'dochi es lo saseh, that there is this phenomenon of a positive command overriding a negative command. Umashma da hakofas kol rosh shmo hakofa, and from the word rosho, I would conclude that the shaving of the entire head constitutes the isur. Otherwise, if it's not a mitzora, the isur, the prohibition of pas rosham lo sakifu es pas roshchem. V'akati b'tar minolon, but I still wouldn't know that the mitzora must use only a tar for his hair removal. Lahachi kosav rachmona zikono. So that's why zikono appears to tell me, as we learned earlier at great length, that the Mitzorah, through the word Zikano, the extra word Zikano, his hair removal is only with a razor. This last discussion was all under the Rabbanan. We were working within the sheet of the Rabbanan. So we discovered from these words, Rosho and Zikano, the information we just discussed, that Osiyase v'dochi lo sase, and that would have been learned from Rosho, and we learned from Zikano the din of tar. The Gemara now asks, that's fine and good as far as the Rabbanan are concerned. They learned from Rosho. We mentioned 2 points, and the first of them was that Osiyase v'dochi lo sase. What about Rebbe Ozer? Rebbe Ozer, he focused on the word Rosho, and through Rosho he came to the conclusion only ta'ar for the Mitzorah. Where does Rebbe Ozer derive the principle of positive command when coming in conflict with the negative command will supersede the negative command? For Rebbe Ozer, dosi aseh v'dochi lo yisaseh min olei, Rebbe Ozer, who used Rosho for tar, where does he learn this principle? Answer: Yolif mi Gedilim. He learns it from the psukim in the Torah dealing with Gedilim. Gedilim are tzitzis. Desanya. It says in the Torah, Lo silbash shatnes, Semer upishtim yachdov. Thou shalt not wear fabrics made of shatnes, which is a combination of tsemer, of wool, and pishtim, and flax or linen. And following that pasuk, it says, Gedilim ta'aseh lecha. So if we continue reading in the Gemara to the top of Mem Beis Amud Aleph, Ha Gedilim ta'aseh lecha mehem. That's as we said, the reading of the Torah is such that after the negative command of lo sil b'shatnes, the Torah says, well, give dilim ta'asecha, make tzitzis. So what the Torah is saying is that in general you cannot wear shatnes, but when it comes to the positive command of tzitzis, the positive command supersedes the negative command, and in making tzitzis you are allowed to wear a combination of, we'll say, woolen tzitzis that are tied into a linen garment. By the way, let us just caution that what we just said has to do with, we'll call it Torah level law. As far as practical law is concerned, do not come to any conclusions in terms of practical applied law from what we just said, because you'll find that it's not something that you can conclude so simply, especially in view of the fact that nowadays there are questions concerning whether we are really truly fulfilling the Torah requirement of tzitzis, especially in face of the issues concerning tchelis, which I certainly don't want to get involved with in the context of our Daf Yomi shiur. So at this point then we have the Rabbanan and their moker for tar only, Rebbe Ozer and his moker for tar only. According to the Rabbanan, it was learned from the word Zikano. According to Rebbe Ozer, it was learned from the word Rosho. We have the Rabbanan and their moker for Osi Aseh V'dochi Lo Saseh. They learned that from Zikano, and Rebbe Ozer learns it from the mitzvah of tzitzis. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.